Welcome to the B2B Growth Blueprint podcast, where we talk with entrepreneurs, founders, and leaders at B2B services, tech, and SaaS companies to learn the systems and processes they've used to create success for their business. And we'll also learn from marketing and sales experts to provide insights to help you grow your business. I'm your host, Mark Osborne, and the podcast is brought to you by Modern Revenue Strategies and their 10x ROI B2B growth guarantee. Schedule a free diagnostic call to learn the fastest path to double your B2B revenues in just 90 days. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the B2B Growth Blueprint podcast. I'm your host, Mark Osborne, and today I'm very excited to welcome my guest, James Vanreusel. Now, James is the founder and CEO of Vanreusel Ventures, which is a CFO advisory firm that supports founder-led and mission-driven businesses through fundraising, M&A, FP&A, and strategic finance, with a global focus across tech, healthcare, and impact-driven sectors. He's a CFA charter holder and certified exit planning advisor, and he spent the early years of his career on Wall Street as VP at Bank of America Securities, generating $8 million in annual sales before moving into international finance and serving as CFO for SPBD, where he launched and operated microfinance banks across Samoa, Tonga, Fiji, and the Solomon Islands. Today, James leads fractional CFO engagements across more than a dozen organizations and is recognized for his work guiding founder exits, navigating sector roll-ups, and structuring the financial side of complex M&A transactions on both the for-profit and nonprofit sides of the market. What makes James's perspective really unique is that he sees the deal landscape from multiple seats at once. He's been an operator, an advisor, a financier, gives him unusually clear read on where the next wave of consolidation is heading and how owners should be positioning themselves before private equity comes knocking. So James, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for the intro.
Absolutely.
I'm
So we've
very
got a lot
excited to
of
be here.
yeah, we've got a lot of fun topics to dive into. But before we do, give our audience a little bit of background of the twists and turns. How did you go from Wall Street to Samoa and now back in I think you're in the Bay Area, right?
Yeah. So, kind of stepping way back. So originally, I'm from Europe. I grew up in Belgium,
Okay.
and I always had a strong desire to come live in the U.S. So
Okay.
my ticket in was to go to business school down in Texas. A little bit of a culture clash, but it was a lot of fun. And from there, I got, as you said, my job on Wall Street actually was in San Francisco during the internet boom, 99 through 2000. And which was a lot of fun, but I had to get up really early for stock
Yeah.
market hours. So moved to New York, did the whole Wall Street thing for another 8 years. And then I'd gotten interested in more social finance and mission-driven social enterprises.
Hmm.
And I transitioned over into microfinance. And so I was working in the South Pacific with an entrepreneur who was building out microfinance banks in that area, as I said. Um,
No
so
worries.
building out microfinance banks in that area. We from there, I had grown a little bit restless and wanted to do something different. And at the same time, I'd gotten married, moved to San Francisco, and within a few days of moving, the largest investor in the microfinance network emailed me and said, "Hey, you should, you're new." You should get to know some cool people, meet the CEO of one of my portfolio companies. He's a great guy. And so I sat down with him, and it turned out he was looking for a part-time CFO. And so I thought, okay, great. Let me work with him on a really cool project. He was doing it was a nonprofit software company doing work in Kenya and Nepal. And so I worked with him while I was trying to figure out what to do, and that's kind of how the whole corporate finance consulting company started. This was back in 2014, so it's been 12 years now. and you know, kept that hybrid structure of kind of a for-profit background with nonprofit mission-oriented companies as
Uh-huh.
well. So, we work with a lot of, VC-backed companies, bootstrapped companies that I think we're going to talk about a little bit more, especially on the private equity side, but also a lot of international nonprofits.
Super interesting. And, certainly you've seen the world, at least through the lens of a balance sheet,
Yeah.
as you've worked with all of these companies and all these different environments. And I think that gives you sort of a really unique perspective, and one that our audience will value for a lot. And when you and I were sort of chatting before the call, there's this, sort of concept today that private equity moves into certain sectors, and some folks are terrified of that because they feel like it's going to come in and crush them. Others are excited by it because they feel like, oh,
Mhm.
this is my opportunity, to get a big exit. But it's certainly a sort of a trend in the space that people are trying to stay ahead of. And you made sort of a comment when we were talking about, PE is coming for you in 6 to 18 months. In fact, I work with some other folks that they've actually even used that in messaging to business owners as they're trying to get meetings. Talk to us a little bit about if someone is in one of those sectors and they start to hear from their peers, oh, we're getting unsolicited calls from private equity, or they start getting those calls from private equity, and they get this sense like we're in one of those hot sectors. What are some of the things that they should be doing when they recognize that to ensure that they're positioned for the best possible outcomes of that context?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think, you know, companies should always be ready for sale,
Yeah.
right? It's not something you can just flip a light switch and you're there.
Right.
It will take at least a year to get ready, if not longer, depending on the state of your books, etc. Um, I think the one thing you don't want to do is rush things because, as you said, private equity is coming for you in 6 to 18 months. Usually, you can already see one or two acquisitions being made, and private equity isn't usually the only buyer in the space, right?
Mhm.
There is PE, but there are also strategics. It could be competitors. So there can be a bidding war that happens. Um, and they can't buy everything at once. So usually private equity comes in because it's a fragmented space, and so there are lots of different players. And if you are one of those players, then that is most likely good news. And
Mhm.
so then you need to start thinking, okay, if private equity is coming and I'm going to get a call at some point here, it's still going to take them time to do all their due diligence and everything, but I would take it very seriously, and I would say, okay, can I make an investment here and accelerate things? I mean, you can go onto an LLM and just say, hey, what do I need to do here to increase my valuation? But I think what you really want is
Yeah.
you want to find somebody who um, who specializes in this. So not necessarily a broker, right? But somebody who
Right.
specializes into coming into a company, let's say 2 years before an exit, and starts working with you to maximize your valuation, especially for private equity, because private equity is looking for very specific things. They're looking at, EBITDA. They're looking at, keeping the expenses under control. You want to show up with, as little debt as possible because their whole strategy is to lever you up, to buy you. Um, and those are pretty specialized things to understand. And finding the right person who can help I think, is really valuable because you can easily double or triple your valuation. And so the investment really makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and thinking about that, like so often business owners have been thinking about, making investments in their business for some marginal return
Hmm.
of, well, I'm going to increase maybe my top line revenues by 10% and maybe my profits by 5% by making this big capital investment. And that's, sort of the year return payback. But when you think about increasing the multiple that could be paid for your business, that becomes a much bigger, sort of denominator in that calculus of how worthwhile it is to make these investments in improving systems and processes and things that make your business really best in class, so that when private equity is evaluating this versus that, and oftentimes they have multiple options, you can really stand out among those options.
Yeah. Yeah. And what they're really, they want to, you want to show up to PE with as high an EBITDA as possible, right?
Yeah,
Both dollars, but also percent of revenue. That's really the thing you want to look at. What's my EBITDA as a percent of revenue? And one of the, what they're going to do is they're going to look at your company and say, where can I save money? And typically, if it's a roll up, your shared services, your overhead is all going to disappear.
yeah,
So that's a benefit that they're going to get from the acquisition. And so if you can make that as small as possible, right, by condensing your SG&A, your overhead, and maximizing, above the line, so maximizing your gross margin, that's going to really boost your valuation because
yeah.
they're going to see that you are, lean and mean and everything is focused on the top line and it's all flowing through to the bottom line, the EBITDA number. And so if you don't do it in advance, they're going to pay you less and they're going to do it after the fact.
That's right. Now, I have heard it said that investments with, advisors, and you talked about finding a specific advisor that could prepare you for, these types of contexts. Those sort of investments can oftentimes be added back to because it's really a one-time investment of, getting the company ready. And so when you
Mhm.
think about making those investments, it makes even more sense to make those investments because it flows back into that EBITDA, or at least in the way that you're valued, while improving the overall business operations. Is that true?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So it's wise to do a quality of earnings
Yeah,
exercise, figure out, what are the repeatable earnings? What are the repeatable expenses? Pull out the one-time items, and that's really what you want to look at. So yeah, so if you're hiring, you know, this individual, that can probably get pulled out, the prep work of hiring a corporate attorney just to review all your contracts, both, with your customers, but then also, probably an HR lawyer just to review your employee contracts, just to make sure there's nothing hidden there that they can just kind of latch onto and say, ooh, that's gonna, come
that's
back
right.
and hit the valuation, right? So, and at any point in time, if you can maximize how your operations work, you're going to be making more money anyway, whether somebody's coming in to buy you or not. So,
Right.
all these exercises are good to do in any case.
That's right. As they say in the Exit Planning Institute, exit planning is just good business planning.
Yeah.
And all the things that make your business more attractive to a potential buyer make it more fun to run and ultimately more profitable for you to run.
Hmm. Yeah, that's right.
So we talked a little bit about some of the things that companies should think about if they spot that they're in, one of these contexts. But you've got some perspective and you've seen a few cycles of these things over the many years that you've been doing this. What are some ways that you can look into that crystal ball and make some predictions around what's likely to be upcoming sectors, or how to, someone in a sector think, what's the likelihood that my sector might be one that PE moves into?
That's next. Yeah, not always easy to figure out, but I think
Yeah.
if you can, like I play a lot of tennis and there are plenty of, PE people at my tennis club. And usually the ones I play with are on the younger side. So they might still be associates.
Uh-huh.
So, I don't know how much they can really talk about this stuff outside of the company, but that's where you're going to get the information from. What are they looking at? Maybe it's something that they're not doing any business in right now, but a couple of years from now might be an interesting area, especially with
Yeah.
business cycles, right? Industrial sometimes are really bad, and then 4 years later they're very popular. Um, they're always looking for companies that are throwing off a lot of cash.
Yeah.
Um, so, and it's usually the more boring stuff, right? There's the companies that the venture capitalists like to look at, and then there's the companies that the private equity people like to look at. And usually those are the more boring ones. But they throw off a lot of cash
Yeah.
because they have to pay for the debt.
Do you see that private equity tends to move either sort of vertically or horizontally in certain industries? So, if they move into, a common thing not that long ago was, dentistry and
Mhm.
buying, independent dental practices. So then are they more likely to move into other, sort of independent healthcare practices that are, operating in local markets? Or are they more likely to move into dentistry supplies or, providers to the dentistry industry? What have you seen?
Yeah, I think it could be both.
Yeah,
The benefit of going vertical integration is that you already know one area, right? And
yeah,
so now you're already doing the due diligence on the suppliers, the vendors, and you're starting to figure out, oh, this could be interesting. This seems like a really good business to be in. It throws off a lot of cash. It's good EBITDA margins, very reliable. They're not, you need to figure out in the due diligence, are some of the suppliers going to go under? So there could be a
right.
supply issue. Um, and so a lot of the work's already been done. So I think it's an easy way if there are, other companies involved with, as you said, dentists, that's an area that you would probably look into. Uh,
Yeah,
because that's interesting. Starting a whole new area takes time because you need to do a full industry analysis, competitor analysis, etc. Who are the players? Who else is trying to do a roll up there? Who am I competing with? It'll just take a lot of time. Doesn't mean it's bad and it doesn't happen because it does, but the vertical integration is kind of the easier path and
yeah.
one to maximize.
Interesting. So definitely a way to read the tea leaves is as you see, within the verticalization of the industry, a way to stay ahead of it.
Yeah.
So a lot of our audience is, founders, entrepreneurs who are growing and running businesses, but there are also a fair number of sort of advisors to those businesses who listen and tune in. As you see the dynamics that change in a sector, when there is a roll up or when things are happening, what are some of the angles that other advisors might play, whether it's service providers or brokers or bankers or other folks? What are some of those things that those folks should be thinking about when they start to see that acquisitions are happening in a particular sector and maybe a sector where they have clients, experience,
Mhm.
expertise?
Yeah, I mean it takes a whole team to make this happen successfully.
Yeah,
So I think when if you're the business owner, you want to figure out like, okay, who could my team be,
yeah,
right? And a lot of the vendors belong to different networking groups, and they kind of know who they like to work with. They've had experience with each other, or they know who the right people are, right?
yeah,
You'd be amazed how many different types of lawyers there are. I mean,
yeah,
there are a lot of different types of lawyers, and just knowing, um, who the right corporate attorney is to work with, because you can pay anywhere from $400 an hour to $2,000 an hour, right? And so and the $400 an hour person could be, just as good, but
yeah,
it's a tiny firm. right?
Right.
Compared to some of the biggest ones. And there are benefits of that and benefits of, paying less as well. So, if you're a vendor, you, you need, like for example, I need to know five, six different corporate attorneys that I could work with because they specialize in different industries, they different size companies, different fee structures, and you're really trying to find, maybe two that would work well, and then you can present them to the company, to the CEO, and they can make the decision who to work with. But
Yeah.
it's a lot of, it's the advisor that's getting you ready, the corporate attorney, the labor lawyer, maybe there's a broker, depending on how big the deal is, smaller
Hmm.
deals. There are brokers that will help you for a deal that's 10 million and less, and there are others who will only do, 20 to 50, or others that do 100 plus. So you need to know like who to work with. Um, valuation experts. There are lots of valuation firms out there, quality of earnings experts. Um, I'm trying to run through my group here. But yeah, just lots of people you want to be talking to and who are, really essential to,
That's right.
to getting it all done. And ideally, they all know each other.
Right.
um, and they have experience working with each other because they know exactly what to do, when to do it, um, and yeah, they'll have had good experiences working with each other.
Well, and that benefit is there's like a shared shorthand in the same way that, we're both certified exit planning advisors. We have some base level of understanding around, certain topics and things, and so groups develop that themselves as well as folks that pursue similar certifications or work in the same industry together, and
Mhm.
so develop that shorthand,
Yeah.
which is super important. So you're obviously an expert in a lot of really interesting topics, and we could talk all day, but I got to be mindful of your time. But before I let you go, like, give us the pitch. Who exactly do you work with, and how exactly do you help them?
Yeah, so we work with, as I said before, kind of a variety of different companies.
Yeah.
When they're bootstrap companies, we what we do is we typically come in, let's say 5 years before you're thinking of selling.
Hmm.
And typically the business owner has, spent the last decade perfecting the business model, and they've become cash flow positive, and it's really working, but they only have like 3 to 5 million in revenue. So they're on the
Hmm.
smaller side, and they say, right, I want to get to 30 to 50 million revenue and sell my company. How do I do that? And they've typically just had a bookkeeper for the last 10 years,
Right.
right? So we'll come in, strategically figure out, okay, what's the plan? Do you need to raise debt? Do you want to raise equity? Um, do you just want to keep bootstrapping it? Look at the accounting. Is it solid? Will it, if somebody shows up in a year, could you sell the company? Looking at forward projections, liquidity, HR, got to build out the team. So making sure that that's all running properly. So ideally, couple of years in, you're still a couple of years from selling, but everything is good. So if you did bring in, your lawyers and everything to check stuff, it should already be 99% of the way there. So that's what we do on the bootstrap side. On the VC back side, a lot of it usually comes around, just before they want to raise money and they need to get stuff in good shape. So usually we come in after the seed round, before the Series A, when things become a lot more serious, and help them through the A, the B, the C rounds. And then on the, our nonprofit social enterprise side, a lot, it's the nonprofit side's mostly 501(c)(3)s, but they work internationally. So Africa, Asia, all the different industries, and SDGs. We also work sometimes with US nonprofits that do the work in the US. And then we also do work for foundations where we do the financial due diligence for them. So whenever they make big new grants will help them look at the financials and kind of flag any risks that they should know about. So that's kind of what we do. And yeah, we love scaling companies. So
And what's the best way to get in touch with you?
yeah, email is always the best. So james@vanreuselventures.com. We get all the messages through the website as well that get responded to. But yeah, I love getting the emails.
Well, James, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I learned a lot. I'm sure our audience did as well.
Okay, thanks, Mark. It was a pleasure.
Talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for joining this episode of the B2B Growth Blueprint podcast. We hope you've gained insights to grow your business. If you enjoyed this discussion, please rate, comment, like on your favorite platform, and share to others who will find it useful. Do you know a CEO, founder, or leader at an early stage B2B services, tech, or SaaS company who would like to be a guest and share their story? Send us a note. Let's schedule a conversation.